Maybe we'll kick it off right on time. Welcome to everybody who's joined. Thank you for joining. I know most of you, which is awesome. My name is Penny, for anyone who doesn't know me. I've spent my career coaching and consulting financial advisors and working exclusively within the wealth management industry. A couple years ago, I co-founded and now run an RIA aggregator, and we'll get into what that actually means, called Journey Strategic Wealth. And I'm joined today by one of our co-founders and my business partner, Damian LoBasso. I'll just give him the floor to share his background for 30 seconds, and then we're going to get right into our discussion today.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Penny. As Penny mentioned, my name is Damian LoBasso. I'm one of the founding partners of Journey and the current CFO. My background is I started off in mergers and acquisitions, did that for about 8 years before transitioning to the corporate finance world and into the private wealth management world, where I started as vice president of Dynasty Financial Partners. Worked at Dynasty for a number of years before transitioning out and founding Compass CFO Solutions, which is a fully outsourced CFO service exclusively for RIAs. And it was there that I really became close to Penny, our other two co-founders, Mike Brown and Brian Flynn, and we came up with the idea for Journey. And when the team asked me to come on board, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to join Penny and the team and really start to build out what we have today.
Awesome. And it's important always for me to have everybody in our organization share our backgrounds, because we have a really eclectic mix of experience in the RIA space, from the practice management side to the finance and accounting and M&A side. And so we're going to try to bring some of that to our discussion today. I will just say that we want this conversation, and even for those who watch it recorded, to feel informal and conversational. There's so many webinars right now that you all join that feel really stuffy, and it's executives talking at a very high level. And well, I guess we are executives. We want to have just a real conversation about the RIA space and what's happening and how advisors can really think about navigating either building, transitioning, or selling this business in this space. The reason we're hosting this webinar, folks, is because we literally talk to hundreds of financial advisors a month between the two of us. And recently it struck us how many conversations we're having with advisors, prospects, and just advisors who are friends of ours, who say things like, gosh, I really didn't know that, or I didn't fully understand the structure, or I'm not even really sure how the firm I'm currently at is structured. And so I think it's important for us to educate and empower all of you, whether you're thinking about making a move, whether you just want to have a little bit more knowledge about our space. It's important for us to act as objectively as possible, even though we do run an RIA. We also have some folks on who've registered and are on from what we call friendly competitor RIAs, and we're so excited to welcome you here. And I think the more we can work together to educate one another and help advisors, the better our entire industry will be. Okay, so that's our brief introduction. Let's get right into it. I'm going to share my slides. Hopefully you all can see how to choose the right RIA. I mean, that is sort of the topic of discussion today, but we're going to talk about so much more. And we're going to start with sort of the like really basic, obvious question of like, what is an RIA? How is it different than a broker dealer? And why has the RIA space grown so dramatically over the last few years? It's really important to start with that context for a number of reasons, which we'll get into in a second. So let's start with the first one. An RIA, difference between an RIA and a BD in really simple terms: RIAs, pure RIAs, so RIAs that do not have broker-dealer affiliations, and we'll talk about that difference in a second. These are entities that are regulated directly by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Something that's surprising to advisors when they are transitioning to the RIA space is that FINRA licenses are kind of moot in our space. So advisors who decide to go fee only, who join an RIA, give up FINRA licenses unless, of course, they want to continue to do brokerage business. So when you think RIA, you think fee only, and that could mean advisory fee, planning fee, or fee for advice. When you think FINRA, you think commission on a product sold, usually, or a brokerage product. Now, you can be an RIA within a broker dealer, and we'll get into that in a second. But for the most part, RIAs are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. We do not sell our own proprietary products. And generally speaking, advisors who move to this space have gotten to a place where they are usually either majority fee or fee only. I talk to a lot of advisors who are coming from the insurance broker dealer space or have done a lot of brokerage business and are inquiring about the RIA space. And I always tell them, if the majority of your revenue is being derived from something other than fee only, it probably doesn't make sense for you to be in the RIA space. Remember, as an RIA or an IAR, an advisor of an RIA, you are held to a fiduciary standard in every single instance, meaning any recommendation you make for a client, it has to be under a fiduciary standard. So a lot of times when I'm talking to folks who are coming from maybe the insurance broker dealer world or the wirehouse world, and they want to continue to do business as they've been doing it, but under an RIA umbrella, in many cases, the SEC probably wouldn't want, let's just say, a life insurance product sold in every single meeting. And not saying that anyone does that, but you'll notice that there are very distinct differences to how business is actually done, especially from a planning perspective in the RIA world. Now, there's approximately 15,000, probably a little bit more RIAs today. What I'll say broadly is that advisors have recognized a couple of things over the last decade, which has really pushed the movement to the independent RIA space. They've recognized that many of them have outgrown the systems that built them. So for advisors who grew up in a captive environment, whether it was a wirehouse or an old school independent broker dealer, they've realized that they've grown. They need better tech. They want better and different ways to engage and communicate with the consumer. And that doesn't just mean how they talk to the consumer via social media. That may mean the way in which they communicate with them via technology. So they've recognized that their business has grown and become a little bit more modern than the firm that they've sort of grown up in. And so that really started the push to independence in the RIA space. People often ask me, is there no compliance? Like, is compliance so much better when you're an RIA? The reality is that we're actually under stricter compliance standards to some extent because we're regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. But in our experience, and again, I'm not using any technical terms here, I'm trying to talk in real terms. Compliance is, I find, to be more logical, the way the SEC thinks about the way we do business and the way we communicate with clients. In many cases, when you're at a big broker dealer or a big firm, FINRA and the compliance standards are managing to 16,000 advisors at the firm and managing to the lowest common denominator. In the RIA space, especially with some of the more boutique firms like ours, there's just a lot more sort of flexibility in how we can allow advisors to sort of operate and engage with clients. Two really important facts about the RIA space today. 70% of all organic growth, and there's not that much organic growth happening, folks, just because the markets have helped us tremendously the last decade. But of the organic growth that's happening now in the RIA and independent space, the majority of it is happening at firms with $1 billion or more in assets. Another interesting fact, 92.5% of assets are managed by firms with over $5 billion in AUM. And basically what that's telling us is that consolidation in our industry is, obviously we know what's happening, where the industry is sort of favoring the larger institutions because the larger institutions have scale and infrastructure. And so if we were hosting this webinar maybe 10 years ago, we might be recommending that advisors go out on their own and start their own RIA because it's super easy to get the business started and you have total freedom and flexibility. Unfortunately, the industry has changed drastically in the last decade. Private equity money has changed the landscape of our industry. And the reality is that the larger firms have an easier time gaining operational efficiency, helping advisors grow, and just doing business with the custodians and the various tech platforms. So the larger institutions are growing faster. That doesn't mean that you necessarily need to leave your practice and join a larger firm, but I do want the wheels starting to spin for you around, what is it that you're really struggling right now with in your practice? What don't you like doing? What do you like doing? Being part of a larger organization, a larger RIA rather, can alleviate some of the burdens that you have either in an independent broker dealer right now, or if you're running the business on your own. Damian, anything you
And
would
Penny,
add?
yeah, perfect timing. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that RAs in general, every single one of them needs probably 90% of the same resources to operate, whether it's technology, human capital, a physical presence, business development, marketing. When you look at a side-by-side comparison of the overall expenses, or the resources that are needed, all RIAs are built, obviously with some tweaks, almost as carbon copies of one another. So when you start thinking about how would that affect an advisor's ability to be profitable, to grow a sustainable business, you really start seeing that magnified with the larger businesses, because they're able to do it on a much larger scale, because you have to pay for the same technology, you have to pay for the same compliance oversight, you have to pay for the same marketing. But when you're a solo advisor that's somewhere in the vicinity of 50 to 100 or 150 million in AUM versus a firm that's multiple billions, that fee is just, or the cost is just compressed so much lower, which is why you start to feel it so much more when you're an individual advisor going at this by yourself.
So true. And it's a great segue into how do we really think about categorizing the different firms in the RIA space. I find that advisors will come to us and say, I'm talking to 5 different firms. And the reality is that other than the different names of the firms, they really can't identify what's different about each one. And Damian just alluded to that. Again, we're speaking to you like we're speaking to advisor friends of ours. The truth is, we all have access to the same tech. There are some firms, some of the biggest institutions, biggest RAs in our space, have invested technology, money rather, into building some proprietary tech or some proprietary sort of data support systems. But the reality is that we're all using the same stuff. And so when you're looking at the differences between firms, technology, a firm may be using a different planning software or a different portfolio management tool, but there are very, very few differences. Especially if you're a solo advisor or solo RIA, there are very few differences between the different tech options within each piece of a tech stack. And many of you have probably seen Michael Kitzis's FinTech map. There's literally hundreds of options right now in the FinTech space. I actually think we've done a disservice to advisors by having so many entrants into the FinTech space, because it makes it so much more difficult to make a decision. Not many differences in terms of tech, not many differences in terms of investment management. This may be surprising to folks. We have conversations with advisors all the time where they say, I really want to retain the investment management part of what I do. I love it. And we look at a statement or a portfolio and we realize that everybody's sort of doing the same thing. There's very, very few differences unless you're really looking at an RIA that specializes in some sort of esoteric investing. There are some RIAs that focus only on ESG. There are some RIAs that really specialize in alts and really work in the ultra high net worth space. Every other RIA in the what I would call retail space basically manages money the same way. Maybe that's not a popular statement, but it is the truth. And technology is so advanced now in the portfolio management space that for firms like ours or any RIA aggregator that is bringing on an advisory team, advisors don't really have to worry anymore about how will my book transfer over. I have these investments and highly appreciated stocks, or clients are in certain. Realistically, everything can be moved over or transition to move over a period of time so that clients don't feel any tax consequences. Something that you definitely should ask if you are talking to a firm that's going to transition your book over to their models, important to ask that. We'll get into investment management and talk about the differences between a TAMP, so actually using a firm's proprietary portfolios versus just a firm that's managing a models-based business. There's a big difference between those two things that you should know about. We'll get to that in a second. But how do you categorize firms in the space? So here's how we think about it. There's a million different ways to categorize firms. The one thing that's important to note is that there are pure RIAs. So that is an RIA that is fee only. There's no brokerage business allowed. You can't sell insurance. You can't sell individual stocks, nothing like that. You can only collect fees for services or on advisory. But then there are RIAs that have broker-dealer affiliations. So there's what's called RIA-friendly broker-dealers. We work with an RIA-friendly broker-dealer. These broker-dealers are not like the big broker-dealers that we hear about in our industry and know about, like LPL and Raymond James and Commonwealth. These are broker-dealers that act as simply an accommodation to the business, meaning you don't need to be recognized, you're not recognized as a producer, you don't have to use them, you don't have to run business through them. They are simply there if you need them. If you have a client that has brokerage business that cannot move, if you have a very specific need to sell a variable annuity, in some case, you could do that business through the broker dealer, but there's no sort of production requirements or requirements to do business. There are also
and Penny,
go ahead.
To that point, sorry for cutting you off.
Please.
You had mentioned it in the first slide. The ability to eliminate your licenses has really become apparent in the last 6 or 7 years as a reason why many advisors, are going independent, which wasn't overly clear even early, 10 years ago. But advisors are saying, if you're saying that I don't need to maintain my Series 7 or 63 or 65, whatever it might be, and I can do this entirely fee-based, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a few slides, but everything that you, or most things you can do on the brokerage side now have fee-only alternative. And that's another reason why the space has completely transformed in the last 15 years is the optionality and the availability of tools and products that allow you to maintain the fiduciary standard and be fee-only while not alienating certain subsets of your client base who might have a traditional commission-based need. There are products for that that are moved fee only.
That's such a good point. So think fee-based annuities, fee-based insurance, and there's no fee-based whole life insurance product, but fee-based insurance alternatives. As the industry moves to this total fiduciary standard because consumers are demanding that of their advisors, there are options now to do totally fee-only business, even with what has traditionally been brokerage-only products. So RIA only, RIA with BD affiliations, and then there's BDs with RIAs inside of them. And the distinction between these two is super critical. Most of the time when we're talking to an advisor who is looking who needs a broker-dealer affiliation, they are looking at these two options and think they are the same. We are not here to tell you one is worse or better or right or wrong, but the reality is that when you have a corporate RIA within a broker-dealer, the truth is the broker-dealer is the mothership. And so you have to keep your FINRA licenses in almost every case. You're still recognized as a producer, and you are still having to adhere to ultimately the guidelines of the broker-dealer. Now, that may not matter and may not sort of bother advisors at all, but oftentimes what we see is that when there's an advisor affiliating with an RIA that is part of an OSJ that sits within a district, within a broker-dealer, a lot of times there are things that can start to feel, you could start to feel friction within that structure for a couple reasons. And one thing I really want advisors to recognize, and we'll get into the payout conversation in a minute, when you're getting an offer from a firm that is offering you a specific payout and they are embedded within that structure, I'm just going to say it bluntly, everybody needs to make money. Everybody needs to make margin. And so what often happens is that advisor is giving up money, paying money to the firm that they've joined, probably more so than they would have to if they were just going directly to any of, an RIA aggregator that doesn't have sort of all of these home offices above them, if that makes sense. And so oftentimes we'll talk to advisors who will say, I'm feeling like I'm part of this organization that's part of a bigger organization, but I'm not really getting the total value. And when you're paying basis points or giving up percentage points to a firm within a bigger firm within a bigger firm, theoretically, you should be getting everything you could ever possibly need to run and sell that business. And oftentimes advisors start to feel that friction when they're like, God, I'm giving up so much. I'm still having to deal with FINRA stuff, but I'm part of this boutique organization. And so whereas that was the destination of choice years ago for many advisors, advisors are finding that maybe it's time to just go out and really simplify the business model. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case for every advisor, but that is a theme that we've heard the last couple of years that I wanted to mention. So in terms of the RIA space, there are solopreneur RIAs, and it might be better to see it on the spectrum that we drew out for you. On the left side, you're going to see most freedom of choice, but most operational responsibilities. So that's the solo RIAs. That's you saying, I want to go out and launch my own RIA. I said it a couple minutes ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I might have said to an advisor with 100, 200 million in AUM, go for it. You're going to have freedom. You're going to be able to run your lifestyle practice and not have the, home office breathing down your neck. The reality is that, as Damian mentioned, the economics have changed so drastically that to make a business like this continuously profitable and to maximize the valuation of the enterprise, it doesn't make sense unless you really want to, with a couple $100 million, to launch your own RIA, only because of the level of responsibility required of the advisor. But if you really want to do that, you're responsible for filing your ADV, you're responsible for corresponding with the SEC, you're responsible for finding the tech platforms, putting the tech stack together, staying up to speed on the fintech space, what's changing, what's happening. So much goes into running your own business. Some advisors really have that desire. More power to you if you do. I would also categorize the solo RIA space as an RIA with a couple of producers who are also acting as the leadership team. And if you're out there looking to join an RIA, you may be talking to one of these firms. Maybe it's a couple of founding partners, run a boutique lifestyle RIA, and they're asking you to join. And in most cases, they're asking you to join. You're going to be on a payout. You're going to get access to whatever resources they have built at the firm thus far. We'll get into the different ways contracts are structured in a second, but that's a solo RIA. All the way on the other side, we'll call these the consolidators. I didn't want to name names, but I think some of these firms are really known out there and just absolutely killing it right now. So when I think of consolidators, I think of firms like Mercer. These are firms that are massive. They're coming in and they're buying the business. You're not transacting with them unless you're selling 100% of your equity, either immediately or really soon after you join, and you become an employee of the organization. Now, for a long time, being an employee had a negative connotation. And a lot of that has to do with the wirehouses and the handcuffs that advisors have felt at some of these firms. Being an employee at an RIA is not necessarily a bad thing, but the consolidators are there to consolidate. They're building a business that has advisor producers and relationship managers in-house. Everything you've built before that goes away at some point. We talk to a lot of advisors who are in the Gen X range, the 40 to 45-year-old advisor who has a deal on the table from a consolidator, and they're asking if they should take that deal. 90%, Damian, check me on that, 90% of the time, we recommend advisors do not take that deal. If you have 20 years left in this business to build, selling equity now to a firm will do you a disservice over the next decade or 2 decades, especially if you are in growth mode. So even if the money feels really attractive to you up front, if you do not need to de-risk and you do not need the money, we don't recommend taking a deal like that. Again, there's so many specifics to this, but just some general comments. Damian, anything on that before I get to the two in the middle?
No, but I would say, and I don't want it to sound like dystopian, but there are a tremendous amount of firms on the solo RIA side that are successful. But where it comes down to is that the founders and the management team there are spending 70% of their time making the firm successful, and it's in doing all of the operational tasks, all of the oversight, and all of that work. Whereas they're not spending 70 or 80% of their time managing their client base, growing their book, networking, prospecting, the items that have brought them success in the past, and really what they're best at. And so I don't want to make it sound like you can't find success or it's significantly harder. It's where do you want to be spending your time? Because I'm sure that an advisor who really is committed to it will find can find and will find success. It's just, is that how you want to be spending your time for the foreseeable future until you scale to a level where you can have a COO and a CCO and a CTO and a CIO? It's worth noting, because that is the paradox that advisors wind up finding themselves in when they first launch. Is it's 2 years since I've launched. I'm spending all my time managing my team, managing tech problems, managing everything. I'm not growing how I want to grow, or in the capacity I want to grow, because I'm an entrepreneur now.
Yeah, and actually the actual stats on this now have changed. Advisors who are playing dual roles. They're the main advisor slash rainmaker, and they are also the main business operator, let's say the leader, the traditional solopreneur practice. They are spending 70% of their time to 80% of their time operating the business, 20 to 30% of their time in an advising capacity. There's no way around that unless you hire a person to run the business for you, which statistically speaking, consultants, for former consultants, would tell you unless you're generating 3 million in revenue, probably doesn't make sense for you to hire a full-time president or COO of a business. And so there's a lot of things that go into sort of thinking about where you want to be spending your time, which is why most advisors end up choosing one of these two options in the middle when they're going to the RIA space. So there's the platform providers and there's the aggregators. What's really important to note is that there are a lot of firms out there that call themselves RIAs. Technically, they are RIAs. They are registered as registered investment advisors with the SEC. But, and I don't want to say all they do, but their value proposition to advisors is that they are offering core infrastructure. And so as you're having conversations with firms, it's important to understand, is this a firm that's actively going to help me run and build my business and operate it? Or is this a firm that is basically handing me the foundation upon which I am going to build? And there's a major difference between those two models. And most advisors don't recognize that until they get to the firm and then realize, oh gosh, now I actually have to figure out how to use the infrastructure to my advantage. And so platform providers usually will, and maybe I'll go back to the slide just so you can see this in writing. Platform providers will usually offer you services a la carte. The stuff that comes standard, like the table stake stuff, is usually the tech stack. One thing I want to make sure everybody sort of knows, and anybody who hears me speak, I talk about this all the time. People oftentimes think they're going to leave a broker dealer, come to the RIA space, and going to have this amazing tech experience where robots are just doing everything for them and data is flowing accurately. We face so many of the same challenges that broker dealers face as it relates to data aggregation, integrations, and getting tech to work for us. And so what platform providers have done for advisors is basically handle the building of the tech stack behind the scenes. This is another major, I'll call it capacity and time killer, actually getting tech to speak to one another, especially if there aren't open APIs, really, really difficult to get data to flow from, let's say, your planning tool to your CRM. And so platform providers will provide, let's say, tech. They may provide compliance oversight, usually they do, HR, and oftentimes for an added fee, they will offer investment management resources. Usually that means they are offering you access to their research and models if you want to use them, although in some cases you don't necessarily have to. What's important to know about the platform provider RIAs is that, and again, some of this is anecdotal and opinion based, but 10, 15 years ago, just being a platform provider, amalgamating all these resources for advisors was actually really useful for advisors because there wasn't that much knowledge and information about the RIA space. The way these firms make money is they mark up the technology, the compliance resources, the investment management resources. And so years ago, it sort of made sense for an advisor to have somebody do this for them, pay a little bit of an extra fee to sort of get access to everything. And I'm oversimplifying here. But keep in mind, when a firm is just offering you core services, they make money by marking up whatever it costs them to access those services. And this is not negative. I mean, we all are in the business of making money. That's the reality. That's how these firms make money. And so oftentimes what happens is advisors recognize, gosh, I could probably access some of this maybe cheaper, more cost effectively on my own, or maybe I'm not getting the value I thought I was going to get just with this core infrastructure. The other thing to be mindful of when you're going to a platform provider is that oftentimes they might position a certain deal to you and position a certain payout and not let you know that that payout will go down as you add resources. So if you're going to access the investment management resources and have them trade for you, manage money for you, that is extra money off the top essentially. And so usually you'll see payouts, and we can sort of talk about this for both platform providers and aggregators, usually anywhere within, I mean, realistically, it's within the 40 to 90% range. But when you're talking about the platform providers, like 70, 80s, low 90s, but then as you add resources, that payout comes down, and then you are still responsible for running the business. And this is a really important point. For every RIA book of business that Damian and I have ever looked at, any of the books Damian has ever managed, and you'll speak to this in a second, the reality is that no matter what the firm is telling you, at the end of the day, gross payout or net payout is irrelevant. Net profits of your business mean everything. And so after you take the payout from the firm and then you have to run your own business, on average, firms that are actively growing and adding staff are netting somewhere in the 40% range. Damian, check me on that, but talk a little bit to this difference between payout and ultimately net profits of the business.
The easiest way to think about it, and I use this term often, is what's referred to as a cost plus model. You're given a cost. So it could say, a platform service provider might say the cost is 25 basis points of your AUM is our fee. Then there's the plus. So if you need to use our power planners, it's plus this expense. If you need, as Penny alluded to, if you have to use our investment management, or if you have to use any of our resources, it's plus this, plus that. So it's a cost plus model. So what you see is the lowest cost that you'll pay, which is obviously the most attractive to you, without realizing that as you find success, that cost is only going to go up, and the risk of that is borne entirely by you as the advisor. And so Penny nailed it on the head, because what we'll see is, and when and to speak only to Journey, when we put a proposal in front of an advisor and it potentially says a 50% payout, and we could talk about how that works, they'll say, well, that's insulting. I just got one that said 80% from another firm, and then we'll dive deeper, because that 80% only covers 25% of their total expenses or their total cost. And then when we add in all the different layers of what's actually needed, realistically, they're, as Penny mentioned, they're in the four. And so there's it's not technically, it's a headline risk. You don't want to get too caught up in what that number is, that top line number is, or that payout number is, until you see every single of the 400 lines that it takes to actually run an RIA. And then you can say, okay, after I add paper to the copier, after, everyone gets water jugs delivered to the office, which is actually a separate issue because it's so expensive now. It's just after all that, like, how much money am I actually making? It's far less than what's in many cases broadcasted by.
Great point. And we're not saying where platform providers are really great, by the way, is if you are an advisor who is really comfortable running your lifestyle practice, meaning you're not looking to grow exponentially. And by the way, we're the first to say, you have the right to decide that you want to run a lifestyle practice. Just because you don't want to build $1 billion business and be a CEO that's on, all these like media outlets, like that doesn't mean you're not successful as an advisor. In fact, some of those advisors are the most successful advisors because their clients are the happiest. And so if you are an advisor who says, I'm really comfortable doing what I'm doing, I want to coast, I want to just continue to work with the households I'm working with, but I don't want to have to figure out tech and go hire an outsourced compliance officer. Platform provider sometimes is a really good option. A lot of times we'll talk to firms that'll say, well, guys, my business is super lean right now. Like I'm netting 70% or 65%. Like why would I take a quote unquote lower payout? The reality is that if you plan to grow the business and make yourself less relevant to the business over time, which by the way, if you are really engaged in succession planning, you have to do. You have to plan for the fact that at some point, you're not going to be advising clients, someone else on your team will be. If you're really committed to that process, you have to invest significant money in the business. I've never seen an RIA or firm, independent firm, growing, investing in team, building a succession and continuity plan that's netting better than 45%. And that's just the reality of what it takes to run a business that is growing and poised ultimately for the G2 succession internally. Now, the great news is there's tons of other options. And This is not maybe a popular comment, but if you say, you know what, Penny, I have 5 years left, I don't have time to build a succession plan internally, guess what? There are literally hundreds of firms, Journey included, that will say, we'll buy your business, no problem. And you'll get a great valuation on it. So you don't necessarily have to solve for it, even though the industry is telling you you do. But it is important to understand sort of where you're at, what you're willing to do, what you want to do before you even make a decision on which of these options make sense. Really quickly, and we're going to spend the least amount talking about it, the most popular type of RIA, or I'd say the one that's sort of gaining the most attention, is the aggregator RIA. There's so many different variations of the aggregator RIAs, and sometimes they have the characteristics of all of the other types of firms combined. Aggregators are, sometimes when people think of aggregators, they think of a firm like Hightower, for example. They're sort of like the maybe one of the most popular examples. Journey is considered an aggregator. Aggregators basically mean it's one firm that's bringing together different firms and advisory teams underneath, and in some cases allowing those firms to maintain their own identity, meaning they can continue to serve and work with the types of clients they want. They can continue to grow the way they want. They can continue to own their own businesses, but they're all sort of aggregated under one umbrella. Now, there are certain aggregators that will allow the sub-advisory team to maintain the name of the firm, and there are some that don't. If I had to rank the questions I get from advisors, this is probably the most popular. Should I keep my name or not? The honest truth is, if you're looking at this just from a monetization standpoint, meaning I'm going to sell my business at a certain point in time, I deserve to get maximum value for that enterprise, which, by the way, we totally agree with. You've built the business, you deserve to maximize the valuation. Having your own name, not only is it irrelevant, in many cases, the value of your firm will be significantly higher if you join into a bigger firm that has national recognition and is aggregated with other firms with the same name. That is not our opinion, that is fact. Private equity companies respectfully don't care about Phillips Financial, in Queens, New York, where I'm from, obviously so proud to be from Queens. Private equity firms care about the firms that have national recognition, billions in assets, advisors all across the country. Now, you may say, you know what, I don't really care about that. My name is super important to me. Perfect. That is a personal decision that you need to make. But if the question is, does it matter from a valuation standpoint, the answer to that is really, really clear just around monetization. Damian, anything to add to that?
And I point out that's not just this industry, right? That's across industry. And what becomes overly apparent, and what's become overly apparent as M&A has picked up over the last 10 years in this space, firms that do have the name or the LoBasso name run an even higher risk of value degradation at the end, because the name is tied to the advisor, to the owner. So when they do try to implement a succession plan and they ultimately do leave, everyone's like, well, where's Phillips or where's LoBasso? And that actually runs, and that's been proven to have a negative impact on client perception of, or prospect perception of the firm. So just something to keep in mind when you're, if you haven't yet launched an RIA, think about that. Although everybody wants the name on the shingle, it sometimes makes, or most of the times makes sense not to, for that very reason. But Penny alluded to all the major factors to why aggregation in that sense, or consolidation in the name, has all the benefits of potentially taking the larger name with slightly bigger scope.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is that, again, the tie to the name in many cases is really personal. But when you look at valuations and how the economics in our business have changed over the past decade, the reality is that firms in, like, we'll call it the sub-billion range, maybe even sub-3 billion, the valuations on those businesses are generally the same, meaning the multiples that you're actually going to get when you sell a business. It's very rare to see a firm, and this wasn't always the case, but again, consolidation, private equity money has changed the economics of the business. So if you're an advisor running a $500 million shop, amazing. But the value, the multiple you'll get on that business versus a business that's 300 million or 200 million is not very different. You see a big multiple pick at the larger firm level. And we'll talk about this in a second. Maybe we'll talk about it right now. If you are joining an aggregator that is putting you on their ADV, this is really important to understand the difference. Meaning you're technically an IAR of the RIA, right? The benefit, now that may feel like, God, I'm giving up so much control. But the reason firms are doing that now, the reason we are structured that way, is because that is how advisors ultimately benefit in a monetization event. If you are joining a $5 billion firm, you're still running your practice, doing your thing, but you're part of this bigger organization. If and when that firm monetizes, your sub business is recognized at the valuation that that bigger firm gets, which is significantly higher in every single case than the valuation you would get as a solo RIA. This is part of the reason why consolidation is happening as quickly as it's happening. Go ahead.
And the simplest way of thinking about it, and the banking term is if I'm looking to buy an asset, from a simplicity standpoint, it's much easier for me to value that asset as one piece. So if everybody's an employee of that asset or an IAR of that asset, and all the AUM and all the technical assets are consolidated under one head, I can understand and model out the profitability, the value of that single asset. Now, if you're saying that there's one, mothership, and then 30 different independent RIAs own with their own unique identity all around it, now you're asking me to go out and value 30 unique assets, package them together, and then add a value to that parent company, and then discount, because not everyone's going to come and not all of them are going to be successful. So when you just think about this from purely a simplicity standpoint of the acquirer, there's just so much more attractiveness in that consolidated model of one brand, one employee set, one mission, rather than having to do the aggregation of 30 different individual entities. It's tough.
Yeah, and we're, again, folks, speaking from a consulting and sort of business standpoint, trying to give you the sort of objective business case for these different models. You may have a really strong personal opinion that you do not want that. And guess what? It is your right to go to whatever firm or build whatever firm you want. There are pros and cons to everything. The last thing that is really important to note within the aggregators is sometimes you're going to find an aggregator, and some of these firms are, big names out there right now that have a very big broker dealer presence within the RIA. You want to look out for that. You definitely want to look into the firm's ADV. Actually look through, like, how does the firm make money? If they're making money on proprietary product internally, but they're an RIA, they have a major broker dealer affiliation, which is going to change the way in which your experience is with the RIA. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of aggregators out there that, because of what we just said, the bigger firms want to make money ultimately. Many of them are looking to sell or IPO. They have to take a stake in the advisor's business. And there's pros and cons to this. We get a lot of questions about, should I take the check? 90% of the time, when an advisor is coming to us and saying, I have a deal on the table, the firm is offering me X, that X is not free money. Welcome to our firm, we're giving you $1 million. That is either a forgivable note or some sort of money in exchange for equity in the number of advisors we have spoken to that have taken a check, have a 7 to 8 year tie to a company with clawback provisions and restrictive covenants, who are unhappy and wish they made a different decision, is literally the reason we started Journey. It is, in some ways, and I get on a soapbox here, in some ways it is borderline predatory at this point in our industry, because the larger aggregators need to ask the firm if they're private equity backed. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It changes the way in which the firm is making decisions about who they transact with and how they transact. If a firm is bringing 10, 20, 30 advisors a year, and they're offering a lot of money, they have a lot of cash essentially to give, know that that is coming with certain restrictions. Now, if you go to the firm and you're totally happy, it's irrelevant. You're going to stay at the firm for 7 to 8 years, great. More often than not, now in our industry, advisors go, and a year or 2 years in, they're saying, damn, I want to get out of my contract. Damian, you have more experience in this than I do. Any comments?
I'm just laughing how you said it's borderline predatory, and then you said, I'm not saying it's good or bad.
Yeah, yeah. When it goes past the border, it's bad. Yeah.
I will say there's a lot of really good lawyers there, and these contracts, at least the many that I've reviewed, are so ironclad, or the clauses are so extreme, they really are handcuffed. And that's why, we can cover this at different, but that's why so many advisors don't make a move, right? It's this whole analysis paralysis, right? It's these advisors are so scared about making the wrong move that they'll just analyze and interview firms for years and not actually make a move because of that situation. It's because they fear that they'll lose everything, or they'll be handcuffed to a firm for the rest of their career with no way out, and all the upside, or the majority of the upsides, going to the firm. I get it. I get why there's a lot of fear out there. I don't necessarily think that there should be, but you have to really do your diligence on that part, and as I mentioned earlier, not get blown away so much by the number that's getting thrown in your face. There's a lot of things tied to it.
Yeah, and by the way, folks, and again, there are no restrictive covenants in our contracts. We don't force a transaction. We can buy a minority stake or a total stake in an advisor's business at any time intentionally. The decision to sell the business, decision to de-risk, to take cash from the business, that is your decision as the owner. That shouldn't be the acquirer's decision on when you do that. And so really important to think about that, especially if you're going to take a deal. A forgivable note is, but keep in mind, it's a forgivable note. And so again, if you end up going to the firm and you love it and you're happy, it becomes irrelevant. I would say we talk to more advisors that are unhappy. It's probably why they're calling us than not. Just to breeze through this quickly. So structures of a deal, and I know we only have a little bit of time. This is really important. For a long time, the idea of W-2 had a negative connotation. There are a lot of firms out there that put advisors on a W-2 contract, us included. We actually have both W-2 and 1099. Doesn't necessarily, unless you're completely selling your business and you're going to be an employee of one of these really large RIAs that feel like wirehouses now, by the way. If you're a W-2 at a boutique aggregator, it's simply for so that the firm can offer you health benefits and for tax purposes. And so don't necessarily think W-2 is bad. In many cases, the 1099 structure has been the prominent structure because the advisor was running his or her own business. Damian, anything to say on that? You talk a lot about that with our advisor.
Yeah, the only thing I would mention is that this could be very much subject to change in the years ahead. The Department of Labor and the corresponding, government entities, financial advisors are in their crosshairs right now. And I spoke a lot about this at the turn of the year. It was like the Ubers and the Lyfts and the 1099 status versus W-2. They have now shifted to us. And a lot of firms, because it saves them on insurance and saves them on incentive packages, we're forcing or we're really pressing for advisors to come on as 1099s because it saves their overhead costs. And the various government agencies are saying, no. They have your email address. They share your resources. They are in place. This might not be an option, in the next year or so, administration pending. But something very much to keep to keep an eye out for as legislation changes. This is just one of the many aspects of how dynamic the industry is, and it's.
Yeah, and folks, keep in mind, everything in our business is marketing. We're all salespeople. So firms for a long time have said 1099, you're going to own your business, you're the CEO. Realistically, being a 1099, as Damian said, saves the company literally thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And so just be mindful of the differences. If you are going to a firm that wants to put you as a W-2, ask questions about whether you have control over things like, your practice's policies, like when you can take time off and stuff like that. Oftentimes in a firm, some of the bigger firms have very strict sort of codes around bonus structures and comp, but in a firm like ours, and there are others out there like ours, it's simply for tax purposes and to be able to give advisors and their teams benefits. Then we have the grid or the payout. We talked a little bit about that. I get a lot of questions around, like, what do you see as what are the deals that firms are offering? I've seen deals where the payouts are graduated, where they're production-based payouts. So you're starting at 40%. As you produce, you graduate up. Anecdotally speaking, if you're an advisor who wants to get out of that game, if you're an advisor who wants to control your own destiny in terms of, and of course we all want to grow our businesses, but not have a firm really be dictating to you what you need to do or produce in a given year, that structure is going to feel very much like any of the structures you ever were at and any of the traditional firms you were at. Now, again, if you are highly incentivized by producing, that structure might work really well for you. What I often see happen with this structure, if you're on a salary plus bonus, let's say you're at a firm, you're a solo person, you want to start an RIA, but a firm's saying, we're going to pay you a small salary, but you're going to get 10% of everything you bring in. What often happens is once the advisor starts being successful, they start to really resent that structure. And so you really want to think about not just how this comp is going to feel now, but how is this comp going to feel in the best case scenario for you now and in 5 years? And how is the comp going to feel in the worst case scenario for you now and in 5 years? We talked a lot about difference between gross and net payout. The one thing I'll say about services offered, oftentimes firms will charge a lot more money to an advisor to manage investments. That can mean one of two things. A TAMP, so actually using the proprietary funds, let's say, or models of the firm, usually that's more expensive than just having the firms trade within the models that you have. There's a big difference between those two structures. I will tell you that the biggest time suck for advisors in the industry today lies within the investment management piece of their business, obviously. We believe fundamentally that an advisor's best use of time is not in being an investment management technician. Now, it's really important to have a conversation with the firm, though, about if they're doing investment management for you, what does that mean? Does that mean they are trading for you? Do you have a say in the way in which they're thinking about the investment management landscape? Are you going to be on an investment committee? These are important questions for you to ask. We talked about non-solicits and non-competes. I'm going to skip ahead because this is like the meat of the presentation. We're going to give you these slides if you want them. There's really 3 sets of questions that you need to ask yourself as you think through this decision. The first one we call the process of elimination questions. Like, how can you knock off some options, figure out your non-negotiables? If you need a broker-dealer affiliation for whatever, then you're not going to a fee-only RIA. Really simple. So you can knock off those options. If you only want to do financial planning, you don't want to get compensated on AUM, you don't want to get paid commissions on products, guess what? You're probably looking at an advice-only RIA. There are plenty of great ones out there. If you have a desire to sell your practice now or in the near future, or really in the long-term future, you need to go to a firm that has the ability to help you transact. What many advisors don't realize is how time-consuming it is to actually, there are tons of buyers out there, right? But how time-consuming and emotionally daunting it is to find a buyer and structure a deal. A firm that has capital in-house, a firm that has people doing M&A and deal structuring in-house is going to be tremendously helpful to you. Obviously, one of the things we do.
You know, I was just going to say, before I look at a firm's book, before I look at their revenue composition, their expenses, I'm asking myself, does this firm have success? You know, and that's literally question number 1 that I'm asking, and then I'll go into everything else. But you know, it's just that's the question, and because that presents the biggest hurdle for an acquirer is when that advisor ultimately steps aside, or if there's the proverbial, you know, more, you know, the dark scenario, if something happens to that advisor, you know, who's stepping in and how are they stepping? It's always good to be thinking that many steps ahead, because, you know, if we're thinking about purely from a valuation standpoint, will make the value of your practice skyrocket.
Yeah. And so once you have those non-negotiables and you've eliminated, like, then it's the philosophical questions. What is the main role you want to play in your practice? This is the most important question you can ask yourself if you're looking to make a move. And what is the least amount of time you want to spend playing that role? Meaning, you say, I want to just be an advisor, and I'm not willing, I want to be an advisor literally the majority of time that I'm in the business. That knocks out a bunch of choices. all of the choices that require you to build and manage a team, figure out tech, and grow the business. Now, leading a team, hiring people, figuring out compensation, very, 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 very few firms, it's part of why we launched our firm, are designed to actually help you do that. And then the last thing is, as an advisor, what are your non-negotiables? If you've had a bad experience at a firm currently for XYZ reason, and you're going to a firm that kind of looks and feels like that firm, you're going to have the same experience. This is why sometimes when an advisor is at a BD and they're looking to go to another BD, sometimes I'm like, you're still going to a BD. Also, keep in mind, try to talk to the people you're actually going to be engaging with on an ongoing basis at the firm. With the exception of us, who we wear all of the hats in our firm. Most of the time, you're talking to the firm's best salesperson. You're not talking to the person that you're going to be interacting with, engaging with, and consulting with on a daily basis. You have the right to talk to that person and see if you have any sort of rapport with them. Really important. The last thing I'll say is, and again, this is a really helpful slide to use, the level of importance question. Literally list out everything that you are currently doing in your current environment and assess the level of importance of you keeping that and or giving it up, whichever one you want, right? And so there are a couple that I starred here that advisors don't often think about that end up being the biggest time sucks. Things like investment operations. So you can have investment management managed for you, but you're still dealing with the custodian, you're still opening accounts, you're still servicing accounts, etc. Level of importance of retaining that or giving. And then now, once you've narrowed it down to 2 firms, rank these firms in terms of how much they match the level of importance. How much are they going to enable you to either give that up or retain it? The last thing I'll say, folks, and we promised we'd get to it right before we leave. So Journey Strategic Wealth, obviously, we wanted to take the best of every option out there. Literally, we went to market with a type of firm that really didn't exist contractually the ways ours does, with no restrictive covenants in our contracts, total flexibility in when and how you sell, both a W-2 and 1099 structure, and proactive practice management support, meaning we're literally having conversations like this every day with our advisors about how to build, how to grow, what tech to use, and then we're executing behind the scenes. And so when we think about the best options in the business for advisors, we recognize the best options are really siloed. And so what we've done is bring that all together. I'll let Damian have the last word, but if you're interested in talking to us, learning about Journey, even just picking our brain on something, we are here for you. We've dedicated our careers to this work for whatever reason. We love helping advisors, and so feel free to reach out to us. Damian, last.
No, I just want to thank everyone for joining Penny and I. And as Penny mentioned, if you're in a place where you have questions or you have no idea which direction to go in, what's right for you, what options are available, what product services are available, we're here to be a resource as best we can. I think it's just the consulting blood we have in our running through us, and so please never hesitate to reach out and open up that conversation channel. And even if Journey's not the right fit, we certainly can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and just to finish off, well, I said you'd have the last word, but we managed $3 billion in assets across 9 advisors, 6 advisory teams, 3 locations currently, and we're happy to talk to anyone who's interested. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.